So, in studying The Path is the Goal, we are studying meditation. And we have a lot of excellent Buddhist theory. And you could say that all the Buddhist theory really is pointing towards meditation, and the theory and the meditation together, they essentially are skillful means to achieve or effectuate awakening. These are the Buddha's skillful means for us to unveil, you could say, a natural heritage of awakening that he found and that he also could see that all life possesses. So you could say there's a red line of simplicity, or a red thread of simplicity that runs through anything that we're doing on the Buddhist path. And also, it's important that we appreciate that awakening is not defined by the Buddhist. We're talking about a quality of non-confusion that is not limited to metaphysics or philosophy or a priori positions and ideas. So we're really talking about, you could say, the reality that underlies all life. And while there is temporarily some confusion that prevents us from properly seeing, you could say, what is, we are in the fortunate situation to have then in this world, in this era, someone who awoke. And not only that, but this awoke individual agreed to actually share his experience. So here we are, and one thing also that's important is actually we'd want to appreciate the universality of what we're doing, how you could say that the study here is something that's relevant for everyone. And so we're not really doing an insular study of some highly specialized subject. We're really addressing what ails all sentient beings. So with that in mind, we could well bring to this study and also the practice of meditation an attitude of altruism, of wishing to remedy a condition for everyone. And this is what we call preparation with bodhicitta, with a heart of awakening, with a vast scope as our objective. So keeping that in mind as we then study this, we think we're going to use this to benefit others. So the previous sessions have been, so you could say right now I spoke about how this is a red thread, and of course meditation as such is something that is basic to no matter which Buddhist tradition we come across. The possibility of unveiling innate wakefulness through the practice of actually sitting down and coming to our senses, as John Kabat-Zinn puts it. And in our study here, the book has two parts. So the part one, you could say these 3 chapters we had there, we could possibly understand as some indication or giving a sketch of what is the ground, the path, and the fruition or the vision of the practice of meditation. So this we covered last time, and also last time we started part 2. We covered chapter 1, where we are actually looking at, in terms of what it is that we're unveiling, where is it actually we start, and what is it that we have to deal with? Actually, how is our confusion? And like I said, in Buddhism we don't really point to what awakening is. We don't try to pigeonhole it, but in that we experience it through simply removing confusion, then we'd want to know what is this confusion that veils it. So chapter 2 is very much discussing, you could say, the basic condition of bewilderment and the you could say, confused strategies that arise out of this bewilderment. So this was the chapter on meanness, the not meanness, but the addiction or fascination with me, myself. And out of that, you could say all the strategies of that insecurity, me versus the other. And this is then what we call the emotions. Destructive emotions, afflictive states of minds, and so forth. There's a lot of synonyms for that. The Sanskrit is klesha. Tibetan is nyönmong. And actually the etymology of the Tibetan is actually, you could say, crazed conditions of mind. Anyway, that's what we covered last time. And presently then we are on chapter 2 in part 2. And this is more about meditation. So you could say, please refer to this for fine points in terms of technique and practice. So, recollecting the present, coming to the practice of meditation, we are slowing down and we are beginning to, you could say, experience something that we haven't always allowed ourselves to experience. And we mentioned this last time. It's not as if we've been brought up sitting and having moments where we were actually, you could say, proactively just letting go of our ordinary storylines and narratives. So we are doing something extraordinary, and at the same time it's not something new that we're trying to acquire. We're really just proposing here to make friends or be at ease with what actually is, who we really are. And in doing so, we might initially be somewhat alienated, and you could say so many of our cultural practices, like I said, are about escaping from ourselves, distraction, entertainment, and so forth. And we can see even when we have nothing to do, we distract ourselves with reading, some electronic entertainment, and we might actually, you could say, have the humility of being aware that we have a little bit of discomfort when actually there's nothing going on. So this is the situation that we'd want to appreciate. But there's one thing that should be clear here. We're not doing this out of some assumption or some belief that there's something wrong with us, we're inferior. So this in Buddhism we don't do. We're just talking about confusion that's taking place. And Trungpa Rinpoche identifies some traditional spiritual approaches which emphasize, you could say, our inadequacy, which harps on our inferiority in relation to the transcendent. And these, you could say, spiritual traditions very often are actually unable to offer much in terms of actually insight. And rather than they focus on our spiritual poverty, we are seen as sinners and God is seen as great. Now, you could say in such an approach, it's almost as if the more we're constructed as inferior, then the transcendent principle is seen as superior. So we have that kind of gap. And we don't really do that here. You could say actually such approaches is a kind of spiritual materialistic way of inspiring someone to embark on the spiritual path. Trungpa Rinpoche says it's then to reduce them to nothing. But this we don't do. Here we're talking about meditation as providing a sense of empowerment. We can see that we are perfectly workable. We are inspired to do what we're doing. Now there's one thing that is that should be clear, and that is that meditation is not being passive. It's not running away from reality, on the very contrary. And it does require our involvement. There has to be some proactive engagement. So we are, you could say, blazing new trails in terms of how we ordinarily go about things. And at that, in this context, then the teachers, they can just show us the way. We're going to have to do it ourselves. So meditation doesn't exactly conform with consumerist demands for what is easy. You have to do it yourself. You have to do it on your own. And Trungpa Rinpoche gives the example of you can drive your car into your garage, but the car can't take you all the way into your bedroom. So it doesn't matter what kind of philosophy or you could say justifications or reasons we might come up with, glib sort of formulations of spirituality. At the end of the day, we have to do something about who we are, where we are. So we should appreciate that here we have some resources, or rather, to have these resources that we have some extraordinary conditions, many of us. We have education, we have intelligence, we have the time, leisure, and so forth. And all of that actually depends on favorable conditions. And I'd like to say this is why Buddhists emphasize the accumulation of merit. If we go to Buddhist cultures, then sometimes merit is very much about sort of the immediate just success, but there is also the dimension to the understanding of merit, that it's thanks to merit that we could possibly have these freedoms and conditions. So these accumulations, they are dependent on us actually doing it. But the thing is, it's doable. We're not achieving something impossible or mythological, legendary. But however, effort is required. So teachers, they can show us the way, just as a grandmother, she can point out things, she can show us how things are done. But then we have to do it ourselves. And we also have a very moving anecdote of Milarepa's last instruction to his close disciple Gampopa. As Gampopa was taking leave of his teacher, the last instruction was where Milarepa exposed his naked rear, his ass, showing Gampopa how calloused it was from sitting and meditating. And that is you could say, his final instruction on actually persevering in sitting. The Kagyu tradition, they talk about bone meets rock. And that's literally what Milarepa demonstrated there, that actually the sitting bone actually touches the ground. We don't have to take it literally, but it is that sense of applying oneself. So we have to be willing to sit. And once we're willing to sit, then we actually also have to do it. So this brings us to the subject matter. Meditation has two aspects. We have shamatha, which is the development of peace, calm abiding, shine in Tibetan, and then we have vipassana, the development of insight, tlaktong, or wider perspective. So the basic references to vipassana, our awareness of how our confusion operates, as is what we discussed then in the last chapter. But this also remains a little bit nebulous unless we actually have some sense of where we are. We could perhaps appreciate this thing about meanness, the emotions, and so forth, but it still remains philosophical. So this is where we begin to have a need to actually experience some initial grounding, and this is what shamatha then provides. It is absolutely indispensable then to do this practice of sitting. A lot of Buddhists, particularly my neck of the woods, my family, they get very busy with rituals and all sorts of things. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is, you could say, the path of the result, the resultant vehicle where one communicates with innate abiding reality of Buddhahood through a lot of visualization and, you could say, a lot of skillful means relating to the environment, one's physical body, nadis, prana, all of that. But all of this has to actually be done with an awareness of who we are and how we are put together. So we need to have this, you could say, foundational aspect of shamatha, actually being able to sit. We need that grounding. So, as Trungpa Rinpoche says, this cannot be skipped. So shamatha is where we sit. We establish a framework of peace with our physical body being calm, and our mind attaining some focus and grounding through mindfulness. This is then the, you could say, framework of mind. So we need to begin with this before we can address the issue of the basic confusion and also the various psychological afflictions, what we covered last time, meanness and emotions. To even begin to address the emotions, we need to actually have some experience of how, you could say, the neighborhood. So shamatha is very much the obvious, conspicuous aspect of meditation, where we sit, we become calm, and we begin to have some idea of this neighborhood that we are now inhabiting and exploring. Now, when we sit, then we are relating to mindfulness, where we essentially relate to our breath. And as far as the breath goes, this is a key part of our entire being. We might not notice it ordinarily, but it is what sustains us. It's also something that changes. We can notice how our breath is different depending on the circumstances. And in meditation, and particularly like we talked about earlier, this is something that harks back to the Gambopa's commentary on the Samadhi-Raj Sutra, and in general it's something that is very key in Vajrayana practice. We mingle breath and space. So shamatha is relating to our most immediate and valuable asset, this what keeps us alive, our breath. And when we look at our breathing, it also reflects our mind. The continuity of breathing also is, you could say, a metaphor for how our mind operates. You could say the breath is the source of our life, and it's also in conjunction with breath that we have speech, and it's also in conjunction with breath that we have thoughts. We need to breathe to live. When we breathe, it's an essential part of eating, working, moving, everything. Our moods, levels of fatigue, they're all reflected in our breath. So hence the breath is something that's always changing, depending on these changing conditions and circumstances. Breath is something that gravitates towards space. And what we want to do as we meditate, and referring back to the sheet of paper that I sent out to everyone, Trungpa Rinpoche on the practice of meditation, specifically the technique that we are following in this context talks about going out with the out-breath. We'll be talking more about that, but we want to be clear that we have this practice of being aware of the breath, and we surrender it at the end of the out-breath, where we then experience space. We relax in that gap, and we allow a gap in our focus, and then we breathe in. So in this way there is, you could say, the action of our out-breath, then there's stillness, and then there's action again as we breathe in, and then we breathe with action as we breathe out. Then there's the gap, and also together with the gap, then we just quietly breathe in again, and then again action in the sense of our focus on our out-breath. And then as we finish the out-breath, there's a gap. We breathe in, and then again we breathe out, focusing on that. As we breathe out, there's focus. As we then allow the breath to mingle with space, we don't focus anymore. We would just relax, allow a gap. So we could say that this is similar. It's a metaphor for our mind, and the experience of this gap, it's very important for us to begin to actually also loosen our grip on our various thoughts and concepts and so forth. So this is why the breath is recommended as the basis for our mindfulness practice. The breath is something enigmatic, we can't easily grasp it, and so is our mind. There's no clear borders about where we begin or end in terms of who we are as a person, and likewise also with the breath. It's not something that's clearly defined, but at the same time we have a clear sense of who we are, and also when we focus on the breath we have clear, you could say, awareness of the breath. So when we do this, and you could say what you just had there is really the sort of instruction of what we actually do when we meditate. So, you can go over this a few times. You can see where it is in the book. It's page 69, paragraph 2, down the left-hand corner, to page 71, paragraph 1. Read through that. That really is, you could say, what is very helpful to getting some understanding of what we actually do. It's important, and this somehow very often eludes us. When we're meditating, we're not looking for something to happen. We're simply just staying with what is. Things might go up, they might go down, but this is where we're no longer fixating on me. Do I like what's happening? Do I dislike what's happening? This is actually something where we get over ourselves and just say, this is happening, and I'm here, and I actually am not too worried about it. And this is where you could say the shamatha is that we begin to have some sense of where we are, and the vipassana, yes, that is where we begin to be a little bit not too worried about it. This is where we begin to, you could say, this is the effect of allowing some gap, that we have thoughts that arise, but then again we're not too concerned about the content of our thinking. We just come back to the breath. Simple as that. And so that is what we're doing. So we don't really need to think, in my meditation this should be happening or that should be happening. Now, here, Trungpa Rinpoche says we don't need to articulate or comment. We don't need to be philosophers. We don't need any intelligent formulations or comments about what we're experiencing. This is very difficult. We might even think, I'm not a philosopher, I'm just a practitioner. But then very often practitioners, they have a lot to say about what they're experiencing, and very, very often, unfortunately, sort of fixating on what is happening. So regardless of whether we are think of ourselves as philosophers or practitioners, actually as we sit and meditate, it's common for everyone that we want to just relate properly to the breath, the experience of just being. So we are matching up the breath with the mind. We are not really doing more than that. Our attention on the out-breath. We are not even focusing then on the content of the mind or our ideas. And we don't actually concentrate on the breath either. We're just using it as a reference point. We have the focus, like we said before, 25% on the out-breath. And so it's really just something that enables us to be present. It's an anchor. It enables us to be here. It enables us to cultivate mindfulness. So we are fully present. But as we're being present, again, we're not interested in who we are or even the content of our thoughts. We could be clueless about all of that without focusing on any credentials about ourselves. We can just be present. Very simple. We might meet some sages even. They might sometimes be surprisingly carefree. Not in any way sort of, you could say, self-conscious in a sort of neurotic way. Just simple. They're just present. So we are fully minding in the sense of our attention is full on the breath, or 25% of our attention at least, but we are grounded, completely grounded in being present. And there we are aware of that consciousness which cannot be seen. In Sanskrit we call this recollection, that this present chapter is about, this mindfulness that we're talking about. It's called smriti, Tibetan denpa, and we can call it recollection. But recollection is not something that we're remembering. It's just meaning that we're here. We're brought back to being present. So this is recollection that brings us back to the present. Now there's no need for us to think that we're doing something esoteric or unusual. Recollection or mindfulness, it's basic to everything we do. We're always recollecting, and we're always remembering, being aware, and so forth. We're always dealing with the content of our mind, and doing so with some, you could say, intelligence, some attention. Now, when we are mindful, we have some reference point, and you could say these reference points then enable us to be present. We have these objects of our attention. So generally when we say recollection, there's something that we're recollecting, something we're mindful of. So our sitting, walking, sleeping, eating, engaging with others, our own introspection, all these things, they're objects of our mind. They're all reference points. This is in regard to being. You could say we have just this you could say mechanism. We are attentive to something. That's just how things are. Now, once we are, you could say, aware of an object, we very often then make choices. We begin to be sort of discerning, or maybe even, you could say, discriminating, and maybe even fussy. So we then make choices in regards to these reference points. And then this is based on our attention to these objects, these various thoughts we're having. So that is in regard then to what we do. Now, in regards to just looking at how our mind functions in this regard, just having awareness of objects and then our reactions to these objects, this is not particularly about then being present. But this is just, here Trungpa Rinpoche is just bringing this, you could say, mapping this to show us how recollection also works. This is where we generally operate on with the basic ground of bewilderment, the basic ground of me-ness. But this recollection, this is how we operate. So we want to become aware of how we function, what it is that drives us. Now, we have this recollection in everything we do, and even when we think we're not being mindful, it's still there, as when we do bodily actions, just lifting an arm when we drink. It actually requires recollection that synchronizes our body and our mind and so forth. So when we taste, swallow, we don't let go of the teacup. We know what we're doing. So this recollection is basic to our functioning. And this is what the mind then does. Now, when we do something, it's interesting that actually the consciousness is really just able to have one object at a time. We might think that we are aware of several different things, but these are sort of micro moments of shifting objects of consciousness. And so we are actually not able to have our consciousness two places at once. When we do something, we actually are giving it our full attention, however short the span. So when we pay attention, we are actually giving it our full mind, and that's why we say mindfulness. This is what we want to bring to, you could say, this project here of not being carried away and beginning to have some sense of presence. When we are not present, then when we are mindful and we follow after our different habits and so forth, we develop these patterns. And then these become basic to how we behave, and that in turn then creates further patterns. So we want to, you could say, do something with this capacity, this natural capacity for recollection and we'd want to appreciate how it's connected with synchronicity and us functioning successfully. And as we now are approaching meditation, we want to begin to be properly present, giving the same attention to just being present. This, you could say, consciousness that settles fully on the object enables us to then, on the basis of being aware of the out-breath, it enables us to being properly here. So this is what shamatha initially facilitates, this proper presence, being very simple and being here thoroughly and fully. Now, we work mingling mind and breath, and essentially we go out with the breath with focus, we dissolve the out-breath in space, no focus, and this is what we spoke about earlier on. And as Trungpa Rinpoche says, this is shamatha. It has to be very precise and direct. And we'd want to appreciate this approach of mingling mind and breath, which actually, like I said earlier, also in terms of with mingling with space, is very much a yogic approach that we find in all traditions, but particularly in the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions, we have this emphasis on mingling mind and breath. And so we have here very specifically from Trungpa Rinpoche, where he says, your breath goes out and you go out. Your breath dissolves into the atmosphere and you dissolve into the atmosphere. Then you just let go completely. You even forget meditation practice at that point. You just let go. There is a gap. When we breathe in, then we have a gap, we relax, and then we don't particularly think of that. And then again, we focus as we breathe out, we dissolve, there's a gap, and we breathe back in. Breathing out has focus, strength, and then with the gap there is nothing to hang on to. We are open, no focus. Then we begin again with the in-breath, just breathing in, no big deal, and then again we focus on the out-breath. This is basic shamatha, and as Trungpa Rinpoche says, it has to be very precise and direct. Not as, you could say, some particular achievement, but it's just that we give it really our complete, wholehearted engagement. So that's about the breathing. We also do walking meditation. Trungpa Rinpoche, of course, was trained in the Tibetan tradition where there's not a lot of emphasis on, you could say, shamatha in terms of walking meditation, but coming to the West where we're not that familiar with sitting quietly, he found it quite helpful to introduce walking meditations. And we also find this in the Japanese and in the Thai and Chinese traditions. So this is something that is universally Buddhist. And walking meditation, like mindfulness of breath, is relating fully to what we're doing. We walk with awareness and precision, and we focus, free from any ambition or philosophy. We're not trying to achieve something in particular. We're not sitting there weaving philosophy about what we're doing. It's just to be properly present, precise and direct. Trungpa Rinpoche says, you walk mindfully. You pay heed to, say, your right leg. As your weight shifts, the pressure releases, and the weight is put on the left leg. So your right leg is free. And then you lift it off the ground, swing it. Then it touches the ground, presses the ground as your weight is put on it, and your left leg is released. So this is, of course, not as if we need to be told how to walk. We know, but this is about having the walking as a point of reference, as something that where we place our awareness. So we do so very simply with natural coordination and precision, and what we want to do here is do it with just mindfulness. There's no metaphysics involved, it's just walking. So Are there any questions at this point? There's a question. If we are mindful with our thoughts, why isn't that being here? It is. Actually, the whole teaching, one of the you could say preeminent teaching on mindfulness, which we find in the Pali Canon. I've actually been looking for the Tibetan equivalent. I'm sure it's somewhere. Anyway, it is the Mahasatipatthana Sutra, or Sutta. So there we speak about mindfulness of body, of feeling, of thoughts, and also of phenomena. So yes, we don't exclude anything, and if we can be mindful with our thoughts, that's good. But it's tricky. Definitely, if we're aware of our thoughts and we're not carried away by thoughts, but we just have this sort of have thoughts as objects of mindfulness, then we are not, you could say, captured by mindfulness. Yes, that qualifies in us, you could say, assisting us in being here. Okay. Would it be possible to use something like loving kindness as a support for meditation instead of breath? And if so, how exactly? What would I go back to? Now, this is very good. Look, shamatha, we could say in general, is the aspect of skillful means. This is something that we have runs through the entire path, that we continually have two aspects. You could say the objective of the path, in this case, wisdom, vipassana, which is, you could say, the innate nature, and then the method that actually enables us to see that innate nature. And that's what we call skillful means. So you could say loving kindness that we have in the four immeasurables, or four Brahmaviharas, that definitely is a skillful means, and that also could serve as a support for meditation, as a skillful means. But this is more something that we would use in post-meditation. Then again, we can actually sit and practice this on a cushion and meditate on loving kindness. And if we do that, then we'd very often contemplate, you could say, the reasonings for why we would want to cultivate loving kindness to others. And there we'd very often meditate on gratitude to others, and so forth. So there are particular contemplations for having loving kindness as, you could say, the skillful means, similar to shamatha. So that does exist. So basically there we would go back to contemplation, such as gratefulness. When we do just sitting, can you say something about a watcher being involved? Yes, we have a watcher. At the same time also, and this is very much what is, actually there's in the question and answers, there is something about that in this chapter, where we actually have this, we are actually fully utilizing our sense of self as, you could say, a vehicle. So there is definitely a watcher involved. Then ultimately also there's the watcher exhausts. Then there's a question, when we do just sitting, as Tongse suggested to new Dhammadas practitioner, it is shamatha or is it vipassana? It's both. The thing is, we explain shamatha and vipassana somewhat differently, but in the end, actually the moment that we sit down, relate to our breath, that is shamatha, we begin to settle down, become grounded. Yet at the same time, in that we begin to relinquish our fascination with our thoughts and begin to, you could say, get over our ordinary addiction to following after our thoughts, then already there's an element of vipassana, there's a wider perspective. How to include being mindful of one's breath with Guru Yoga? Well, Guru Yoga actually takes the entire practice of meditation into an entire different dimension, because there actually both shamatha and vipassana are united. We have the focus on the Guru, which is shamatha, and yet with the presence of the Guru, then you could say ordinary concepts, they sort of trickle away, and there is spontaneously vipassana. But then again, as we are doing the visualization in the Guru Yoga, just having the presence of the Guru in front of us and then relating to our breath is a very good way to both prepare any meditation session and also the way that we actually, as we're doing the visualization, it actually stabilizes us. As we just been seeing here, Trungpa Rinpoche talks about how our mind and breath are linked up. So if we have calm breathing, then also we have calm mind, and then we also have calm visualization. Okay, we'll have some more questions at the end. Now, like we said, we are not looking for something to happen. It's very important that our meditation is not like the cat sitting waiting for the mouse to come out. We're sitting waiting for something extraordinary to descend on us. It's already there. We're already present. We're already in reality. We can't help but be present in reality. But what we're doing is familiarizing ourselves with that. And we're taking, you could say, the obsession all about me a little bit out of the equation, and we have some just appreciation of just being mindful is good enough. We don't have to be, you could say, rewarded or confirmed or all of that through some extraordinary meditative experience. We're just learning to be simple. So there we have no particular ambition. So what we'd want to do is to then be cultivating this simplicity, presence, and the directness of it. And this is what we could, together with patience, this is actually what we in Buddhism call discipline. It is participating in this process. We have a very specific technique here. And of course, you might be practicing Guru Yoga, you might be practicing Lojong or whatever, but all of it really is about coming back to working with who we are. So we're not compartmentalizing our Buddhist practice and then who we are depending on what we're doing. It's all, you could say, working on that same mind. So we want to have a very clear, simple participation in whatever technique that we're practicing. Just something that we own it and we just come back to it. Very simple. And in doing that, then, like I said, we don't sit waiting for something to descend on us. We just do it. This practice is, you could say, to simply stay fresh and present without buying into the entanglement of our familiar patterns of expectations and concrete objects that then enable us to confirm ourselves. Confirmation of ourselves can both be that we love what we're, you could say, getting tangled up in, or we don't like it, whatever. But all of this sort of like, dislike, and so forth is actually what continually builds up this sense of self. So this is actually what you could say, we're bypassing that, or simply just letting that be. The practitioner of meditation pays full attention, again, without being sullen. If we become very serious, this becomes a new trip, and that actually becomes then the object, and that actually is hindering us in being properly mindful. So being serious is just another form of busyness. So what we're doing here is just being mindful, simply. Shamatha is experiencing what we are on an immediate experiential level. So this is not something that is Buddhist or new to us. This is just beginning to relate with what is. This is our working material, and it's very good. But we don't need to philosophize about this. We don't need to handle our experience, sort of equipping it with all sorts of handles or metaphysical concepts and so forth. It's our mind, and for the time being, philosophy can wait. As we practice, we might have all sorts of ideas and experiences that serve us. Sometimes we feel we're in heaven, we feel really high, we're up. Sometimes we feel disastrous, really bad, we feel down. But the point here is that whatever happens, we just are not buying into the usual pattern, and we just relate back to our technique precisely, being fully present in whatever experience we're having. And this is about relating to all aspects of our life. And when we get up from the cushion, what we then call post-meditation, this, you could say, view or experience of presence, of what we cultivate in meditation, this is something we bring with us. So we want to take this same simplicity into all aspects of life. Meditation is not compartmentalized as a remedy to just part of our existence. Meditation pervades everything that we do. We're on the spot with wherever we are, whatever we're doing. Trungpa Rinpoche then speaks of our life being completely infested with the practice of meditation. We're on the spot with whatever we do, eating, doing the dishes. Meditation is a life commitment. We need to have some self-consciousness or self-awareness to actually lead a proper life. We know what we're doing. You could say a sense of responsibility, a sense of presence. We, in our culture, sometimes have the notion of self-consciousness as judging oneself, feeling a pain in regard to oneself, and so forth. But again, this actually comes from a strong self-involvement. And that is, again, the opposite of being mindful. So this lightness of just being present, being aware in that sense, is the very opposite of, you could say, heavy-handed self-consciousness. Trungpa Rinpoche actually refers to this heavy-handed as sort of a strong degree of egotism. You could say strong self-involvement. So self-consciousness or self-awareness here means just being present, being oneself, doing a good job about who we are, handling oneself properly. Now, there's the possibility that we could want to, enhance ourselves. Personal growth and self-improvement and all of that. And this is not the objective. In fact, the whole self is, you could say, ultimately seen as a bit of a transparent entity that what we gradually realize, but fixating on it is really the source of disaster, of samsara. So self-improvement and personal growth in Buddhism is a very different matter, not quite what you come across in sort of in some of the more popular contexts. So we are not being present and practicing mindfulness simply to prove something, to become better. It's not about us constructing a new kind of elegance, because Trungpa Rinpoche, he says, we could have this thing where we then are very sort of sense of here I am. Look what a beautiful job I did. This is because I studied and meditated. And he refers to some of the Zen students that he's come across where they seem to sometimes see themselves as, he calls it, self-existing Zen advertisement. The basic point, Trungpa Rinpoche says, is to be precise and direct and without aim. So this we see repeated here, but it's a really subtle point, and it's essential. We need light-handed self-consciousness, and like I mentioned before in regard to this notion of the watcher, we use this experience of self as a vehicle. We use it as a vehicle for our practice. We come back. Yes, here I am. But we begin with that fully. We don't, try to we're not embarrassed about it. This is where we are. We relate to that. So it actually becomes the, you could say, basis for our mindfulness. We're not expecting to be perfectly enlightened. We're not starting off as perfect. We begin with experiencing how we exist right now, fully. So then there is the questions and answers, and there's some very good questions and answers that that come up. There's a few questions that are about post-meditation. I'm obviously not going to go through all of them here, but I'd just like to really encourage you to have a look at them, and maybe you already have. There is the classical sort of lazy man's, can't anything I do be meditation? We have that question. And again, Trungpa Rinpoche is sort of unrelenting. In yes, certainly we could, rather he says yes, we could, but he also says we'd want to be quite clear that we do need to begin to relate to our experience fully, and we do that better in terms of sitting practice. So of course sages are always meditating no matter what, and you could say there is meditation in everything that someone who is practiced does, but we'd want to not really trick ourselves in thinking that we're doing that. We'd want to be quite clear on fully experiencing these, our being, and also this experience of these branches. I remember we talked about before, where talked about the experience of our, you could say, afflicted psychology, the branches that you could say grow off the root of our basic me-ness. So we need to actually begin to experience that. And very often when we're moving, this is just my commentary, but we are simply just distracted. So there is some good common sense in beginning with the with just grounding ourselves, and then once we do that, then we can relate with the emotions and so forth. So then there was a really great little section on selflessness, whether we exist or not. And Trungpa Rinpoche points to how we need to extract ourselves from metaphysics and relate to immediate experience. This is what I like to call the empirical dimension of our experience. And he's quite funny there. The audience seems to think it's quite funny. What's the term? The audience laughs, what is it, uproariously? So that's a quite really sweet little exchange. And then there's also a little bit of a philosophical discussion about our existence, and which is conditioned, and we could say we then relate to ourselves as something unchanging and concrete. And it's Trungpa Rinpoche uses this metaphor of our existence is dependent, and he says a bit like if we say I exist, that's like one, but also one is sort of dependent on the existence of zero. So I was thinking this could possibly be a little bit confusing. I hope you'll read that, but I'd also like to say that what Trungpa is talking about here is basically the establishment of dependent arising and emptiness. So he leaves it a bit playfully obscure, but it's really just to understand that as soon as you say me, and on the basis of me you then construct the other, there's this back and forth. So however way we look at it, this anything that we objectify exists on the basis of something else. And then there's also an interesting little question answer where there's someone very sophisticated who wants to sort of make a little bit of a philosophical statement, and he cuts through that. And then finally there's a question about Tantra and how Tantra fits into this. And Trungpa says that you could say the Vajrayana and the Tantric aspect of the journey is something that just organically grows out of shamatha and vipassana experience. And this we talked about earlier. I think in the first talk then there was some discussion about how the presentation of shamatha vipassana needs to be understood in terms of these three yanas, the Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. So as such, Tantra is something that just naturally happens. It's not even something that's, you could say, an alternative route or something else at all. It's just something that naturally happens. Okay. Are there any questions? There are. I don't fully understand the statement of what we are mentioned in this chapter. That's actually all right, because what we're saying here is not something that is about understanding. It's about sitting down and meditating and beginning to have experience of just being present. So even if we can't formulate intellectually what it means, what we are, it really is just the beginning to sitting down. It's a bit like sometimes when we're busy, we might not even have noticed that we have spilled egg on our tie, or maybe something has come undone. So we sometimes, then we sit down and suddenly we become aware. We sort of look and we go, oh. So there's not really anything to understand as much as just actually sitting and beginning to just become familiar with sitting and the experience of sitting. Then there's the next one. Can you tell us what realization is? No, but from what I gather from what we're studying here, there's a lot of encouragement that we find out. While I'm listening to you, but my thoughts always go to the Mönlam in Bodh Gaya. That's very good. That's devotion. This is because great things are happening. Tongsa Khyentse Rinpoche is in Bodh Gaya, and he's how do you say, doing Mönlam with the Sakyapas and praying, practicing, and teaching perhaps. When my thoughts go to the Mönlam in Bodh Gaya, which technique should I use, shamatha or vipassana? Well, like I said, when we are mindful, and actually there was a question before, can we use thoughts as mindfulness, objects of mindfulness? So let's say you think of Rinpoche in Bodh Gaya, then thinking of him, we could use that as shamatha. And then thinking of him, then you could say there is some experience of devotion or some clarity, and that actually inspires you could say, wider perspective, which then is vipassana. So like I mentioned before, Guru Yoga actually joins together shamatha and vipassana. Being present, simple, and without aim is great, but when decisions and choices come in, how does that work? Well, the thing is that we are not what's called compartmentalizing. We're not saying, okay, my life here with all its complications, decisions, choices is here, and my Buddhist practice is over here. We are practicing to enable us to clear up this mind that has to deal with life. So meditation enables us to make better decisions, be clearer on the choices. The moment that we're not caught up, let's say we have some decisions or choices to make that are perhaps something that give us a lot of fear or give us anger or give us all sorts of discomfort. That's where you could say we then feel afflicted, and being present and simple actually enables us to rise over that afflicted experience and you could say see a little bit with an aerial perspective what needs to be done without being too caught up in how our reactions are. So it's really that, you could say, being present and simple is something that gives us a better perspective. Then there is a question that says, in relation to the point earlier about mindfulness, can you, when you say that consciousness can't be in two places at once, how does this relate to going towards the recognition of self-existing awareness that is taught as being all-pervasive? Well, here we're actually talking about the ordinary confused mind. Sometimes we have some terms that reflect vipassana experience, such as self-existing awareness and so forth, but we generally would say that this consciousness, we try and look. A teacher of mine, Chögyam Rinpoche, once said, I'm going to prostrate all the way from my monastery down to the Bodhnath Stupa if you can see my face. And he says, and somebody says, I can see your face. And he says, what do you see? And he says, I see your face. But what are you actually looking at? And he says, well, right now I see your eye. And now I see your chin. And actually it emerged that as this person was looking at Rinpoche's face, he was actually focusing at many different places that then you could say we stick them together, and then we have a sort of notion that we've seen a whole. But it's very often that we're just focusing on one point at a time. So what we're doing in the practice of meditation here at this point, not really sort of talking about vipassana particularly, but just in terms of mindfulness, is just being fully present on our breath. And that actually relieves us of our ordinary fascination and being carried away by our thinking. See, for example, if we're caught up in thoughts and then somebody distracts us, then we lose our sort of thread. You know, we might be depressed and someone tells a joke. We lose our depression, or we're sort of caught up in something very serious. Somebody makes us laugh. We're brought out of it. So you can say these focuses of our mind are only there as long as we pay attention to them. How could we know whether our just sitting meditation is correct? Well, actually here we're not really, you could say, trying to judge what we're doing. Mind you, today I was looking for some pictures of Trungpa Rinpoche, and there was one, maybe I'll put it up next time, but there was one that came up on Google Images, which is where a picture of Trungpa Rinpoche, and then there's a quote where it says, how can you be stuck on space? Or you can't be stuck on space. And that's actually what we're doing. This is very important. And this is also something that runs right from this level of, you could say, basic shamatha meditation right the way through practices like Mahamudra and Dzogchen, is actually that we just do it. We don't need to, we can check with our teacher, of course, but other than that, we just do it. We shouldn't hold back thinking, am I doing something wrong or whatever. We just give it our best. That's good. And Tsongtse Rinpoche himself, he will say, the mere fact that you're worrying about whether your practice is correct or not, that itself is an insurance that it'll be all right. Okay, that I think concludes for tonight. And next time then, the next chapters to read are chapters 3 and 4. The portable stage set and boredom, full or empty. So thank you very much for attending tonight. Have a good evening or day, depending on where you are. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. Thank you.